Hey guys, my name is Ryan Becker. Welcome to part 2 of my series on how to edit your podcast in Adobe Audition. I'm using Adobe Audition Creative Cloud 2020, so if you're using Master Collection before this went to Creative Cloud, you're going to want to make sure you look up a different kind of tutorial, as the steps that we're going to be following are very specific to Creative Cloud. If you're using a prior edition of Creative Cloud, I believe this is good all the way back to 2018 or 2017's versions. So we're going to go ahead and show you today the initial compression and audio steps that I do to each file that I work with before we get into actually equalizing and balancing the voices out. So the first step that we're looking at today is compression and noise reduction. Those are the two big things that we're going to do. Now, if you watched part 1, you heard me introduce two terms: destructive editing and non-destructive editing. So destructive editing is an edit that is permanent to the file once the file has been saved or the program has been closed. A non-destructive edit is one that can be undone regardless of when you have closed the file or saved the file. It can always be undone. So the first step that I always follow when it comes to editing the podcast is I always start with compression and noise reduction, and I do that within the waveform view, which is destructive editing. So anything you do in the waveform view is typically going to be destructive editing. Now, that might scare you and you think, oh, well, I only have one shot, I only have one file. This is why one of the rules that I always follow for myself is as soon as I'm done recording, I open up my File Explorer or Finder if I'm on a Mac, and I will go ahead and make a duplicate file of all of my recordings. Every single episode I have has a backup raw file of my recording without any edits applied before I've done any of this. That way, if there's some big mess up or I've gone way overboard, or I need to go back and re-edit an episode for some reason, I can always do that and just start from square one. So the first thing I'm going to do is, and you have two options to do this, you can double-click the track in your multi-track view, or you can double-click the file itself in your file view. So once you're here, you're looking at your waveform. On your right is going to be a decibel meter that shows just how loud your peaks are. So for example, over here on the right, this peak right here is sitting at about negative 13 decibels, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. We talked about headroom as you're recording. This pretty much follows that. You can see I got really loud at one point and I'm a little over negative 9 decibels. That's the whole point, is when you record with headroom between negative 24 and negative 12 decibels, it's going to be a lot easier for you to get louder and have natural variation in your voice. Now, there is a problem, and you likely have experienced this problem if you've ever watched an action movie. What typically happens when you watch an action movie? Well, you have to turn the volume up for all the dialogue because you can barely hear it. And then the second some random action scene starts, you have to immediately turn it down and you frantically jump for the remote because now it's way too loud. Compression is going to be what we use in order to balance our sound out, because the human voice actually does have its rises, its peaks, and its lows, its valleys. And it's really important that we kind of bring those two in harmony so that we do the act of turning up and turning down the volume for our listener. The goal is that your listener shouldn't have to sit there with their finger on the volume knob or the volume button, turning it up and turning it down as they listen to your podcast. So here's what compression is. Compression is quite literally the act of compressing this waveform. What we're going to do is we're going to take all of these really loud parts and we're going to turn them down without impacting any of the quiet parts. We're just going to turn them down. See, right now, if I were to take this and see how I just clicked and dragged, now it's turning up everything. If I want to turn it down, it's going to turn down everything. What we want to do is we want to only turn down the peaks without messing with any of the quieter volumes. So to do that, we're going to head over to the effects rack. And now I have this set as a preset. I'm actually not going to be using that preset right now. I'm going to show you how I do this right from square one. So the first thing I'm going to do is head on over to this window and I'm going to click this side arrow and go to amplitude and compression. And then I'm going to use the dynamics processor. Now the one thing to keep in mind with the effects rack is think of these like layers, where layer number 1 is actually the layer that gets applied first. So anything I do beyond any effects or things that I add after 1 will apply after 1 has actually after whatever is in that first slot has applied. So we're only going to be working with the dynamics processor in this view, or in this moment. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just select compressor. That's going to turn it on. So we're going to ignore everything else in this window for right now. We're going to ignore auto gate, expander, and limiter for now. We'll get to them a little bit later, though I don't ever use the expander, so we're not going to go over that because that's not something I ever use. So let's go through these different knobs. These are think of them as virtual knobs. If I click and drag either way, it's gonna adjust them like a knob. This was sitting at -20. This was sitting at, there we go, -20. So threshold. Think of threshold as the decibel point, at the point on this decibel scale where this filter or this compressor, whatever tool you're using, as they all have the threshold, will actually kick in. So what this threshold currently is saying is that at anything louder than -20 decibels, it's going to start turning that down. The rest of these all determine how much that's going to turn down or how quickly it's going to turn down. This is just, you'll want to do this for your own voice. But here I'm going to show you the settings that I use for this. So typically I have this begin working on compressing or making things quieter after -28 decibels. There may be people who do this differently than me. This is just the way that I do it, and it seems to work for me. I've never gotten any complaints about it. So at anything louder than -28 decibels, now the compressor is going to kick in, and it's going to start to turn those down. The ratio is going to determine how much whatever is above that gets turned down. So just, for shorthand, you can set a great beginning place to set this is anywhere from 2 to 4. So 2, 3, or 4. I'm going to set it to 3. 3 is what I use. Now, what is ratio? Ratio means that you're going to turn down something above -28 decibels, louder than -28, down by a factor of 3. So let's say you have a sound that goes 6 decibels over. So you have a sound that actually peaks at -22. If my ratio is set to 3, that means it's going to reduce it by a factor of 3. Then it means that any sound that is -6 decibels over -28, that's going to now only go past -28 by 2 decibels. So that difference, you're going to take the difference between how loud something is versus your actual threshold, and you're going to divide that by the ratio. So if this was 2 and something was 6 decibels over, then it would only, instead of going 6 decibels over, now it would only go 3 decibels over. In effect, I'm cutting that sound in half. Here, I'm cutting it by 2/3. Now, attack and release are pretty self-explanatory as far as what they mean. Attack is how quickly the compressor turns on once a sound has passed the threshold that you've set, and release is how quickly that it lets off, or the compressor deactivates after a sound leaves the threshold or is quieter than the threshold. So the best rule of thumb here is a quick attack. You want it to attack it as soon as it goes over, but a slow release. This is going to be the case for almost everything that you're seeing. In fact, look at the noise gate, for example. These are just the default settings that Adobe Audition uses, but it still follows this. A 1 millisecond attack time and 100 millisecond release time is the default there. I like this that's actually too high. I like it about 108 milliseconds. For me, that's just what I have it set to. I do have it set to attack it quickly. The reason that the release takes a little bit longer is you don't want, as you're talking, you will have normal pauses in between your sentences or even in between phrases in a sentence. And as your voice drops and raises, what you don't want to happen is this to release so quickly that it gives what you have likely heard if you've heard other podcasts that do this. You've heard like this, it sounds like the voice is pulsating in and out, almost like it's being cut off. That's what too quick of a release time will do, both in compressing and in noise gating, which is the auto gate feature that we'll get into near the end. So my release time is going to be 108. And then the last knob is makeup. So what makeup is saying is, okay, you've now turned down everything by a factor of 3 that's louder than this, which means that your whole thing is now quieter. So your makeup dB is going to be how loud or how much do I want to turn up the entire file now to compensate for how much it has just been turned down. For me, I like to turn it up by 12. I like to make up the difference by 12. That's going to turn everything up. So after it compresses everything, the last step that the compressor is going to do is turn everything in the file up by 12 decibels. You can play with that number. It's completely up to you. This is just a number that I have found that works for what I do. The next thing that I'm going to do in this view before I close this is I'm going to activate the limiter. What the limiter says is I'm going to limit this file or this waveform from going above a certain decibel, So for this, the threshold is going to be the limit. In this view, the threshold that I use is -4 decibels. Now, a rule of thumb here is if you've turned down something by over 9 decibels, then you've probably turned it down too much. That's when you'll start to hear distortion or changes in the voice. But so what -4 is going to show me is that there's going to be no peak after I'm done applying this that goes beyond -4 decibels. So once that's done, I'm going to hit exit. Now notice nothing has changed here. Because I haven't actually applied the filter, the effect. Anything that you do in the effects rack in waveform view will require you to actually press apply before it will actually apply. There is a way in waveform to preview the changes that you're going to make before you actually hit apply. To do that, you'll go all the way to the top right, and this says Show Preview Editor. So I'm going to click that, and it's going to duplicate my timeline. It's going to duplicate that waveform, but with whatever effects rack that I have, or effects in the effects rack that I have selected. So this is what it's going to show me. What you don't want is a effects or is a waveform that looks totally flat. You do want some variation. You want some of those high peaks and low valleys. You do, but you want everything to be a little bit louder. This is perfectly fine. If you aren't comfortable, if you want to turn this up more, you can. I could easily come in here to the dynamics processor and turn this up by 17 decibels and close. And now it's going to apply it. There. Now it's turned up even louder. It's completely up to you on how you want to do this. I'm going to cool this off to 15 just to meet in the middle. And then I'm going to close that preview editor and I'm going to click apply. So now it's going to apply to the file. If your file is longer, then this is going to take longer. I've cut out just a short snippet from the intro snippet to a podcast so that we don't have to wait forever. So once you've done that, what you're looking at now is the whole thing has been highlighted to show you what it applied to. I'm going to click anywhere to just deselect. I'm going to zoom in all the way to the beginning. Now, when you record, one thing that you'll want to do is you'll want to record about 10 seconds of room noise. That's where you aren't breathing into the microphone, you aren't talking, there's nothing going on. And the reason being is you're actually going to see, especially once you've turned the whole thing up, if I highlight this, you can see that that's not a perfectly flat line. There's noise that is being picked up, whether that's through a fan in the room, my computer, anything like that. What we're going to do is we're going to capture a kind of a virtual screenshot of that sound, and we're going to tell Audition to remove that sound wherever it finds it. There's one caveat. It cannot remove it if it overlaps with any time that you are talking. The only time that things like this can be removed is when you are not talking. So what you're going to do first is you're going to take a 10 seconds. You can find 5 minimum is what I would say. For a long file, 5 minimum is what you need. But 10 just keeps everything safe for you and gives you some leeway in case you coughed right here and need to select elsewhere. You're going to select that 10 seconds of time. Now you can go up to effects and you can go to noise reduction and capture noise print, or if you see those 2 shortcuts on screen, this is actually a super quick process, and I'm going to show you how I do this. And there's no complications here. If you want to learn more about this, you absolutely can by looking it up. I actually just use the default settings. It just makes my life a lot easier. So I'm going to press Shift P, and it's going to show this pop-up window. The current audio selection will be captured and loaded as a noise print. Yes. Then I'm going to make sure I'm going to hit Control A, or on a Mac, Command A, and I'm going to select the entire file. And then I'm going to hit Control Shift P, or on a Mac, Command Shift P. From there, it's going to open this window. This is your noise reduction effect window. This is daunting. Don't worry about it. I only use the default. You can learn this, more if you would like to, but this is just how the default has always worked for me in the hundreds of episodes that I've had to edit. And there you go. Now that's a perfectly flat line. And it would be so, although all that is gone in wherever there is me not talking, essentially. Now, you're going to want to test this out. After you apply the noise reduction filter, go ahead and listen to yourself talk, like play the file back for yourself. If it sounds at all distorted, robotic, kind of like digital, you'll know it when you hear it. That means you've been too aggressive on the noise reduction. So go ahead and undo what you've done by going down here to history and just going one step up, or pressing Control or Command Z, and then redo the noise reduction by selecting a different portion of the audio, a different portion of the quiet audio, and doing it again. Or in that view, when I hit, you can turn down the noise reduction amount, and you can adjust that as well. So just keep that in mind as you are doing this. Once you have done these steps, you are done in this view with this file. The reason that destructive editing is important for this step is because you need to physically see what is being done to your waveform. In multi-track view, anything being done in your waveform is not actually going to be visible. Anything I do in the effects track here is not going to reflect here. It's going to happen on a layer kind of like above the file, so you're not going to see, it's not going to actually impact the view of the waveform. But when you're compressing your literal waveform, you want to be able to see if you've compressed it too much, if you flattened it too much. That way, you can undo it or make adjustments as you need to. So once I'm done with that, I will wash, rinse, and repeat to every other vocal track that I'm using. So now, once you have actually applied those files, or applied those effects, so if I open up my dynamics processor for Henry's audio now, then let's just say I select compressor and limiter, and I'm just going to leave that be for now. Let's say once I've done this, I want to save this as a preset so I can quickly access it later. All you have to do is click this Save Effects Rack as a preset. It will save the entire thing, whatever you have loaded onto this. It will save it as a preset, and then you can, all you have to do is quickly click this, access it, and for me, I have it named as Initial Compression, and then you'll apply it, and it's going to apply very quickly, and you're good to go. From there, I'm going to go and do that first thing I always do, which is noise reduction. I'm going to select my noise print, and then I'm going to actually apply the noise reduction and let it do its thing. See how quick that was when I have the preset already ready to go. And then I'm done in that view. If you come out of that view with everything selected, it will actually show it selected here. A quick way to undo that is just press G. If you just press the G button on your keyboard, it will deselect, that part of that timeline. So yeah, that's it for destructive editing and the initial compression that you're going to want to do to each file. So thank you for watching part 2. Part 3 is going to go into equalizing your voice and all of the edits that we're going to be doing in this view. So thank you so much for watching part 2. Stick around for part 3 and go check out the Absurd Podcast Network at absurdnetwork.com. Thank you guys.